This will be 5 minutes at 240 words a minute. Jury charge. Ready. You may not consider it for any other purpose. You have heard testimony about Mr. Smith's character for truthfulness. You may consider this evidence only in deciding the believability of Mr. Smith's testimony and how much weight to give to it. You have heard testimony about the defendant's good character. You should consider this testimony together with and in the same way you consider the other evidence. You have heard testimony that the defendant made a statement to Mr. Jones. You must decide whether the defendant actually made the statement, and if so, how much weight to give to the statement. In making these decisions, you should consider all of the evidence, including the defendant's personal characteristics and circumstances under which the statements may have been made. You have heard recorded conversations. This is evidence that you should consider together with and in the same way you consider the other evidence. You were also given transcripts of the conversations to help you follow the recordings as you listened to them. The recordings are the evidence of what was said and who said it. The transcripts are not evidence. If you noticed any difference between what you heard in the conversations and what you read in the transcripts, your understanding of the recording is what matters. In other words, you must rely on what you heard, not what you read. And if you could not hear or understand certain parts of the recordings, you must ignore the transcripts as far as those parts are concerned. You may consider a person's actions, facial expressions, and lip movements that you are able to observe on a video recording to help you determine what was said and who said it. I am providing you with the recordings and a device with instructions on its use. It is up to you to decide whether to listen to the recordings during your deliberations. You may, if you wish, rely on your recollections of what you heard during the trial. Certain summaries and charts were admitted in evidence. You may use those as evidence. It is up to you to decide how much weight to give to the summaries. If you have taken notes during the trial, you may use them during deliberations to help you remember what happened during the trial. You should use your notes only as aids to your memory. The notes are not evidence. All of you should rely on your independent recollection of the evidence, and you should not be unduly influenced by the notes of other jurors. Notes are not entitled to any more weight than the memory or impression of each juror. If you find from your consideration all of the evidence that the government has proved each of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt as to the charge you are considering, then you should find the defendant guilty of that charge. If, on the other hand, you find from your consideration of all the evidence that the government has failed to prove any one of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt as to the charge you are considering, then you should find the defendant not guilty of that charge. In deciding your verdict, you should not consider the possible punishment for the defendant who is on trial. If you decide that the government has proved the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, then it will be my job to decide on the appropriate punishment. A person acts knowingly if he realizes when he is doing and is aware of the nature of his conduct and does not through ignorance, mistake, or accident. In deciding whether the defendant acted knowingly, you may consider all of the evidence, including what the defendant did or said. You may find that the defendant acted knowingly if you find beyond a reasonable doubt that he had a strong suspicion that drugs were in the suitcase and that he deliberately avoided the truth. You may not find that the defendant acted knowingly if he was merely mistaken or careless in not discovering the truth. A person possesses an object if he has the ability to exercise control over it. A person possesses an object if he has the ability and intention to exercise direction or control over the object, either directly or through others, even if he is not in physical contact with it. More than one person may possess an object. If two or more persons share possession, then that is called joint possession. If only one person possesses the object, that is called sole possession. The term possess in these instructions includes both joint and sole possession. If you find that the defendant was in possession of property that recently had been stolen, you may infer that he knew it was stolen. You are not required to make this inference. The term recently has no fixed meaning. The more time that has passed since the property was stolen, the more doubtful an inference that the defendant's knowledge becomes. A person who is in some way responsible for the criminal acts of another person may be found guilty, whether or not the other person has been found guilty. A person who acts on behalf of a corporation, partnership, other entity also is personally responsible for what he does or causes someone to do. However, a person is not responsible for the conduct of others performed on behalf of a corporation merely because that person is an officer, employee, or other agent of a corporation. If a defendant knowingly causes the acts of another, then the defendant is responsible for those acts as though he personally committed them. A defendant's presence at the scene of a crime and knowledge that a crime is being committed is not sufficient by itself to establish the defendant's guilt.